Right. Well, we're week 3 of our live Q&A sessions. It is May 21st. We're in Central Time, so it's 7:31 p.m. We're getting going. We are glad to be able to do this with you. You know, we were here to teach a class. We've gotten such good questions that we're getting a little bit of homework. Yeah. No, we're glad to have these questions. These are some great questions that have come in. We've got 6 here that have come in prior to this live Q&A. Josh is, as always, the man behind the control center that you can't see behind the camera here. So he'll be keeping an eye on that as we go along. We're gonna do our very best to keep it to 30 minutes here and get through these 6 questions. Plus, if anyone jumps on, I have no idea if anyone's in the live part or not, but we will record these questions. I'm sure we'll post them somewhere as a helpful resource as part of this FT 101 class. So if you are watching live, thanks for being here. And if you're catching it after the fact, hopefully this is helpful additional information to what we've been covering through the course. So let's jump in for the sake of time and get going. We have 6 here that have come in. Number 1. All right. Oh, I didn't make intros. I don't know if we need more intros. This is Kevin Adderholtz, Josh Reeves. I'm Chris. Let's go. All right. So question 1. Do you have a sample church policy for Divvy credit card? Divvy's a purchasing card. It's a Visa card. Works like a credit card. Do you have a sample church policy for Divvy credit card holders? Was a question we got. Who wants to take it? I'm just going to ask them and one of y'all answer.
Go for it, man.
All right. All right. And then if it's quiet, then I guess I answer. So we Church Biz do not have a sample policy for that as one of our forms currently. It's a great thought. What I would recommend typically, if I think this question came from somebody's part of a church or ministry, whatever organization, you can typically cover that within your employee handbook. Just have a section in your employee handbook where you talk about how company purchasing, specifically company credit or purchasing cards, are to be used. That's what I would recommend. When I worked for a larger company that was not a church or nonprofit, there was specific language in there for there was a whole like credit card use policy that was several pages. I don't know that you need to go into that level at a church necessarily. I think you can generally cover that, like I'm saying, within a paragraph or 2 in your employee handbook. But you can go as far as having a separate policy, like I mentioned in the corporate world, where it's, hey, if you're going to a nice dinner, a $75 bottle of wine or above is considered excessive. So that that would be something that would not be considered like a normal meal that gets a tax deduction. That was in that corporate policy book. That gets into your alcohol policy as a church, which is a whole separate topic. But you can't
we don't cover alcohol policy.
Yeah, that we don't cover alcohol policy or that in FT 101. But anyway, to keep it simple, I would say just cover that in your employee handbook would be my recommendation. In general, for a lot of these things that cross over into HR, we have just added HR services within the last year plus, and Melissa Steffen does an awesome job leading this for us. And so we may in the future have an HR forms section, but anything HR related, we can connect you up with Melissa so she could help you write any policy docs. There's another question that would pertain to as well. Any adds to that?
I'm curious your thought. I mean, if you were to throw out 2 or 3 simple categories in that policy, what would some of those things be? I mean, I'm sure threshold of spending for approval maybe on a card,
yes.
Receipts, attached or not attached.
Yes.
Those seem to be the big ones. But
yeah, so you would have. Do you require receipts for everything, or is there a dollar threshold that you would require receipts? Just general language, typically that all expenses should be for business purposes or the purposes of the organization,
as evidenced by the approved budget.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And then what you would deem if there's things that you don't want them to spend on, specifically alcohol, entertainment, or what you might call excessive. If there are specific things that you don't want spent on, I would specifically outline those. Otherwise, you don't have really ground to stand on if you don't have it in a policy document.
Yeah. And one other thing too is like who gets a credit card and who's got the ability to assign a credit card. There's been times where anybody who's affiliated with the church, whether staff or volunteer, gets a credit card, and they're very loose. I would challenge a church to kind of think through, all right, so who are we going to allow to carry around a credit card? These are people that are hopefully have visibility to the budget. But then how are we going to authorize someone to actually get a credit card? And so someone has to be responsible for that. And that could be spelled out in the policy.
Yeah.
And one nice thing about Divvy, or I can never remember the new name. Is it
Bill Spend and Expense?
Divvy sounds so much better in my opinion. But is that you can, like, if you do have to give a card to someone who's a volunteer, which again, that's a policy decision, you can set a threshold per card on how much can be spent. So you can have some more controls with a card, like Bill Spend and Expense, and some cards have those controls, but I know we know for, like, I'm not sure that every credit card has that kind of control
Right.
on that side of it. So
Yeah, that is a great control. And like you're saying, Josh, with that particular card, Bill Spend and Expense, you can set a budget, set a limit, say, per month, per year within that budget, and say you can't overspend. You can overspend up to an amount, or you can overspend to whatever. That's just kind of a target amount. And do we require receipts or not? So that is that's one reason that we have liked working with it in particular. All right, number 2, we'll move on to second question. That was a good one. So second question, this was a follow-up to a question last week on the Q&A. We were talking about giving gift cards to church members. So the question asks, is it ever okay to provide cash or check gifts to church members in need versus the gift card you mentioned? So you have a benevolence need. Can you provide cash or check gifts is the question.
Yes. So I don't think you don't necessarily have to provide the support through like a gift card, or let's say that you're paying for rent for somebody that you actually have to pay the landlord directly. There's nothing that would keep you from paying the individual directly. I think with benevolence, it has to be for a basic need. The IRS actually does have some guidance out there, and I know it has to do with, they consider transportation, food, housing. Those are some examples. And then anything outside that wouldn't fall as benevolence. And so having a benevolence policy is great because it defines that. And because you're going to have times where someone may want to, someone's struggling financially and they want help with, college tuition or something like that. And that can easily be confused as hey, that's a proper benevolence request, and it's really not. You can pay them directly. I think the big issue, though, just by overseeing benevolence policies, it really gets down to one thing to consider, like a tip. If someone has financial needs and the church through their benevolence fund is helping, there really is a pastoral requirement there too, right? And so I think some of the concerns as people are actually looking through benevolence requests, they're thinking, well, this is the 4th time that we've received this request, right? And it's like, what do we do about that? And so I would encourage your church to think through that in advance on, how, and you do that and define it within the policy, and really to help yourself out to kind of answer those tough questions as if someone just really is in bad shape and, it's 6-7 times you've helped them out, paid their rent. What's your church going to do from a pastoral standpoint to meet that person where they're at and to kind of really engage them? And so I think that's important too, and that will work itself into the policy because there needs to be some level of follow-up. And so it most likely would be, I'm guessing, some kind of like elder or someone within the ministry that's authorized to be a point of contact for that person.
We had a discussion recently. There's an organization in our county that helps, I think, with putting resumes together, interviewing for jobs, job placement. There is what you're touching on. There's a point where it's like we can lend assistance, but there's also another form of assistance is helping someone being able to provide for themselves, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's wise. You have to have a lot of discernment of, are we in emergencies? Sometimes we have to help, but what's the holistic plan to help this person become self-sustaining, and how can we connect them with outside resources? Sadly, there are people who take advantage of church's generosity and go from this church to that. So there's lots of things, like you said, to be discerning of, and that's where it can't just be hand out. There needs to be process and procedures and all that. So,
and I think that may be kind of getting back to the question. Some of the wisdom to try to get in front of that is like, okay, we just won't pay individuals directly. And I think that that's a good point. Like, okay, you have the need. we'll pay, the landlord directly, or we'll pay, maybe it's some type of medical assistance or things like that. And so I think that's some of the wisdom behind why you would make some kind of rule of not paying individuals, but I don't think there's anything from a legal standpoint that would keep you from doing so.
Yeah. And that ties in as well with controls, and having a team where you have multiple individuals is good. There's a set objective process by which we disperse benevolence, and there's multiple people that have to say okay. It just protects the decision maker. It's not just me making that decision, saying yes to this person and no to this person. There's an objective process, and there's multiple people in that. So these can become emotional requests, and you really want to help out, and it's hard to say no to these things. And so these things are just safeguards, because we want to be generous. We want to help as much as the budget will allow, but not just all that fall on one person's shoulders either, when at all possible. All right, good stuff. So we'll move on to the third question, which really ties back to the first question, is do you have sample employment and contract worker agreements? So someone just looking for assistance as they're trying to draft up documents for potential employees and contract 1099 workers. So y'all look. Let me go on this one. So we don't have anything published on our website, and for me, it's always been just because each one's a little bit unique. So I kind of have a basic kind of format that I work from, but then I draft it up specific to that individual. So I've just never posted anything specific out there, but I don't know, maybe we could in the future if that's of value. We haven't had a lot of requests for that, but as I mentioned, we do have Melissa, that's in her wheelhouse. She's drafting that up all the time as part of the HR work that she does. So definitely something we can take into consideration. That's a great question, something to think about. We've always just drafted that up kind of specific to whatever that contractor or employment arrangement is. So it just hasn't been like a boilerplate template that's worked for a lot of things across the board. So it's a good question. We don't have it currently. There are places you can go get those, and then maybe something we'll add in the future.
Yep.
Okay. Number 4, can a church set up, so 4 and 5 are doozies, so buckle up. Here we go. Can a church set up an investment fund? How should this be managed? Does unrelated income impact tax status or reporting requirements, Mr. Adderholt?
All right, let me get this. So, can a church set up an investment fund? Yes, many of our churches do. All right, so when you're doing this, find a custodian, so a financial institution that's going to hold the assets. You have to go and contract with them. So common ones are going to be like Fidelity, Schwab. They have ones. When you're setting that up for the church, be sure that as you're setting it up, they know that you are a church and you are tax exempt. This past year, I actually just had to fill out a 990T because a church in Minnesota received a large stock gift. Their policy was to liquidate that, just basically sell the stock, get the cash, transfer it. But because this particular church, they weren't set up as a tax-exempt entity I believe they were with Fidelity. Fidelity withheld 20% from the liquidation, and basically just withheld it as a tax payment, sent the money to the IRS, and then the net they give to the church, right? And they're like, oh no, Kevin, what do we do? And I didn't know. I was like, man, it's probably going to be a 990. I did some research. I filled out a 990T. Which is basically it's an unrelated business income tax return for a nonprofit. Filled it out, ended up getting the money back finally. It took like a year, by the way, to get the refund. But that's the number one thing. When you're setting up these accounts, make sure that they know that you are tax exempt. You need to give them the IRS determination letter. If you're a church and you don't have one of those, it's a little bit trickier. You need to make sure you understand, if you're with Fidelity, what their procedures are to make sure that you're flagged as a tax-exempt entity so they're not withholding a big chunk of the revenue that's coming in. Okay, so once you have that account set up, you need to have a policy on, okay, what do we do with, so if Bill's going to give $100,000 of Apple stock every year, what do we do with that? The church needs to have, really it's an investment policy But what I highly recommend is you guys not play in the market. I highly recommend that you just have a policy that you say whatever comes in gets liquidated immediately. In other words, $100,000 of Apple stock comes in, have it sold immediately, get the funds deposited into Fidelity, into your checking account at Fidelity, and then transfer that money over into your church's general operating account. That just kind of protects, I think, the church from market dips, and losing money that way. It's probably, again, a church could manage investments if they wanted to. I mean, they could report realized gains and things like that. But I'm just saying from a stewardship standpoint, I'm more conservative. My recommendation has always been, let's liquidate it. A church is not in the business of timing the market or holding investments or things like that are risk, that have a lot of risk.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily evaluating every single stock that these people are donating to. So have a policy for it. My recommendation is liquidate it ASAP, get the money into the church operating account.
Would you say maybe some of the safer investments are like a CD or a money market account, something that's a guaranteed rate?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. You certain types of debt instruments, saving certificates, CDs, things like that. Absolutely, that's great. Advised. I'm specifically talking about equities that come in, corporate equities, things like that. What markets can dip. It's not wrong to have those. I know some clients that actually leave it in those positions for whatever reason. But it's not something, if I were in control and I was on the finance team and I was tasked with putting together the investment policy, I would highly be recommending that it's something you liquidate and you get the funds in immediately. It also simplifies your accounting as well. You're not having to track unrealized gains and losses every month, which would just drive up your accounting and bookkeeping fees.
Yeah.
So then, does unrelated income impact tax status or reporting requirements? So this is related. So any type of investment gains or or dividends or interest, no, you are a tax exempt entity. You do not have to report and pay tax on that. So no, that's not going to jeopardize any type of tax status for you. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, that's good. I think one misconception I hear fairly regularly is a nonprofit can't make profit, whether they're thinking about like interest on a investment or just you can't bring in more money, like you have to spend everything you bring in. Neither of those are true. Somewhat related to this question. So you're talking about like you can make money on an investment. I think what you said is very wise. I'm the same as you. It's like, I don't want to hold an investment that would lose a lot of money as a fiduciary of the church. If you do and you make a big gain, you're not going to be taxed on it. But rolling into our next question, and you already touched on.
Well, and I actually didn't complete my thought. I mean, it does say does unrelated income, so I initially took that to like dividends, interest.
Right.
Now, it's common with churches, they may have a coffee shop.
That's what I was going into. Okay, yeah.
So, there are exclusions in the tax code for unrelated business activity that would preclude you, as the church, from having to file and report and pay income tax. There's an exhaustive list of which, like interest income and dividends and realized gains from capital transactions are part of. But it doesn't necessarily preclude you from paying tax on, let's say, that coffee shop that you're operating. There are some rules that say, okay, well, yeah, that's an unrelated business to your church, and therefore you need to be reporting your net income from that activity on a 990T and paying corporate rates on that. Well, no, there are some exclusions, and some of those exclusions are for a nonprofit is if it's for the benefit of your members. So this is one that's going to help a lot of nonprofits and in some of the auxiliary activities that they do. If you're doing it mostly for the benefit of your members, then you don't have to report and pay income tax on that. So the example of like the church coffee shop, so you go to church on a Sunday and they have a coffee shop there and you can go buy a coffee. That church is offering that for the benefit of its members there on a Sunday. There is like another exclusion if it's not regularly carried on. There are other organizations that I've worked with that They're like, well, hey, what if I want to make, a coffee shop down the road and that be my ministry? That's where the legal questions start to get more, I guess, more gray. I think there's a tax case out there where actually somewhat recently a church that sponsored a coffee shop that was operating as a ministry, as a nonprofit, actually got shut down by the IRS in terms of their classification, and they had to pay back taxes and things like that. Basically, the IRS said they couldn't operate that way because they violated these exclusions. What we call UBIT, unrelated business income tax, the reason it exists is the government's basically saying, look, you're a nonprofit. You don't have to pay taxes on your goods and services that you sell. But the guy down the street that's doing the same thing, selling coffee, does. So that puts you in an advantage. You get to discount your what you sell because you're not having to factor in, tax expenses as a part of that. But that guy down the street does. UBIT exists to really level the playing field. I think that's helpful for someone on a finance committee thinking through this stuff. And if we go into the last question, number 5, it says, is there ever a reason for a church to file Form 990? If you truly do have unrelated business income, you're doing advertising or something like that, then yes, you would have to file what's called a 990T. And that's where you basically get taxed at corporate rates on your profits from that activity. And then there's another example I can think of where a church would have to file a 990, and we talked about excess benefit transactions in the past. So if one of your pastors, officers, board members, if they leverage the church to benefit in a way that's beyond an arm's length transaction, then per the tax law, that church has a responsibility for that given year to report a 990. I believe it's Schedule L, and they have to disclose the transaction, all parties involved. And then there's a separate filing that they have to do with the IRS where basically you have to report what they call an excise tax, but it's really a penalty of 25% of the value of that transaction on the person that received the benefit. And once that's filed, the IRS, the door's open. The IRS will typically look into it, and then there's all sorts of other penalties that they put on the other board members or anyone who could have influenced that transaction. So certainly a situation you wouldn't want to get into. So yeah, a church doesn't have to file a 990 as long as they're operating above board, as long as they don't have any unrelated business income to report, and as long as they don't participate in any excess benefit transactions.
Yeah. And we've got like 7 minutes. Maybe run this through one just example of this excess benefit transaction might be helpful. If we can think of so our church has a studio that we produce music out of for the benefit of the church. There's $15,000 of music gear in there. And let's say we don't want to have a studio anymore and I want to buy that gear. The market value is $15,000. Well, I'm an elder of the church. But it's like, well, we like Chris. We know Chris. So we sell it. You sell it to me for $10,000.
We want to bless him.
We want to bless Chris. So we're going to sell it to him at a discount. Yeah. That's an excess benefit transaction, right? I get it for $10,000 instead of the $15,000 it's worth. That's a $5,000 benefit to me that should go through that scenario you talked about. That should not happen. And if it does, it needs to be reported in the ways you talked about. It's reportable.
It is reportable.
I shouldn't say it should not happen. If it happens, it's reportable.
It's reportable because you are an elder of the church. And so you're filling out a 990. Again, I believe it's Schedule L. That is a public disclosure. The IRS posts that on their website. Anybody can search it and pull it up. And then there's a separate document that either the church fills out or you could do it individually where you are it's basically like a tax return, really. You're self-assessing an excise tax, which is 25% of the value of that excess benefit. So in this example, it's $5,000.
Yeah.
25% of $5,000. You technically, either the church reports it and pays, or you report and pay. And then you open yourself up for some compliance issues because in the IRS, at that point, they can come in with the church and take a look at the transaction and see what are show me your policies around this, like who approved it, and if it's egregious, then technically that gives them the ammunition they need to, assess you as an elder as a penalty as well, and anyone else. So.
Yeah, that's why it's good to have knowledge of this and just really try to do everything to, above board, arm's length, fair market value when you're doing anything outside your exempt purpose. You had posted something I pulled up about UBIT from the IRS. I won't go through it all for the sake of time, but maybe we could throw it out in our class resources about what constitutes unrelated business income tax. I thought was really good. I had walked through it with one of our churches that was wanting to pay for and build pickleball courts and bring in an outside group to basically run pickleball leagues at their court. And they're like, can we do this? And if we do, what does it mean? So well, okay, there's a lot of things you got to walk through here. Are volunteers running it or not? That's part of the IRS code. There's all the, is it a regular trade or business? Is it regular carried on? Is it essential to your exempt purpose? Well, pickleball is not essential to their exempt purpose. So you got to kind of be able to walk through these things to understand, is this unrelated business income tax or not? That would then constitute a 990T. So great discussion point that,
yeah, and there's churches can fall into, there's churches that rent parking lots out. Rental can be goofy. There's this weird requirement. If it's debt finance property that you're renting, you may have UBIT. If it's not debt financed, you don't. If you own your church building and another church is leasing space from you, for a Sunday night service, you're fine. Nothing to report. If it's debt financed and they're leasing for a Sunday service, you might have to report. So there's other things you'd have to consider, but you may have a reporting requirement.
Yeah. At the end of the day, if you don't know, call CPA, call somebody who does. don't guess on this stuff if you're doing pickleball courts or leasing space in your church. All right. One last question is, I don't have it. Do you have it? Let me see if I can find it here in our.
Yeah, it was, I'll read it here. I've got the email. It's from Dan. And he was just asking, would it be possible to provide a basic church financial policy template? What are the types of categories of things do we need to have controls for, policies for? Basically he was kind of wanting a template to kind of jumpstart writing that from. So
I love that question. Yeah, it's awesome.
Great question. Practical.
There's an org process document that we have. I think that's exactly in line with what he's asking about. So we don't have anything currently on our website, but I think we've got our summer projects kind of laid out for us here tonight from these.
From tell you guys are doing good work, and you're putting us to work, so that's good. But well, we have a document I think we could take as kind of a starting point and post. I'll try to post that in the next week or so on the on Unit 3's Q&A page, and so they can take a look at that. I think there's something I can pull from there, so we'll try to get that to you, Dan. It might not be a full one, but it'll be a good starting point. So I think it's good that he called out controls as well, and really wanting to understand what are good controls for church to have. So note that we make sure in what we have in our class and in whatever we post that might have to update for future classes that Unit 3 ministry application project and use Dan's project there. We'll see.
Yeah, great question.
And we do at Redeemer. We've got a document that we can share, and it basically, I think it's answering his questions, like something to work off of. It's not pretty, but it kind of outlines. Really, it's a good summary. It's for Redeemer Round Rock, but it's a kind of a good summary of everything you guys have taught on, just kind of in a snapshot, and it even incorporates a finance charter and then even finance team member roles. And so that's something I think that we could probably post out and share.
Yeah. I'll look at that and get that sometime this week.
All right. Well, right at time. Who's going to land the plane for us here? We actually have another video to shoot tonight.
Yeah, shooting the last lesson 8, the jumbo Q&A session.
So we'll have the same shirts on in 2 videos. We keep.
Yeah, well, I might have to go change or something. We'll see.
Yeah. Get out the Texas Tech polo for the final video.
I told you I got more polos in Texas Tech. I think I wore this in one of the lessons previous though, so they're gonna see me on that. So
yeah. I'm sure everybody's really worried about what shirts we're wearing. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us for Q&A. We'll stop there, but great questions, and we'll go film this last unit or lesson 8.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for joining. Yep.